Human beings have built cities, conquered oceans, and touched the stars. Yet most have never truly understood themselves. We praise intelligence but worship ignorance disguised as confidence. We drown in information but thirst for wisdom. We confuse comfort with happiness and mistake noise for meaning. Over 2 millennia ago, one man dared to call out this blindness. He told a proud society that its leaders were fools, its teachers pretenders, its values hollow. For this crime, the crime of honesty, Socrates was silenced. But truth is not so easily killed. It lingers, in questions that haunt us, in moments when we pause to wonder who we really are. And it whispers still, the unexamined life is not worth living. This is Socratic Spark, where ancient wisdom meets modern success. If you love timeless lessons and powerful motivation, hit subscribe and let's grow together. To speak of Socrates is to speak of a mirror, one that reflects not the face of a man long dead, but the restless soul of every human being who has ever asked, "Why am I here?" He lived in a city at the height of its glory, Athens, the cradle of democracy, of art, of reason. Yet amid temples and philosophers, Socrates stood apart. He wrote no books, founded no school, and left behind no doctrine. His classroom was a street, his weapon was a question, and his legacy was the awakening of thought itself. In his time, the Athenians prized eloquence and success. The sophists sold clever arguments like merchants sell spice, flavors to please the crowd. Socrates sold nothing. He gave discomfort. He dismantled illusions. He made the mighty feel small, and in doing so, made the small feel capable of greatness. Why does he matter today? Because we, too, live in an age of performance, an age that rewards appearance over truth, noise over understanding. The questions that Socrates asked in the Agora are the same questions that echo in our screens, our politics, our hearts. What is justice? What is virtue? What is a good life? He reminds us that wisdom does not lie in knowing all the answers, but in daring to admit how little we know. He teaches that truth is not inherited. It is earned through dialogue, reflection, and the courage to be wrong. When the city demanded his silence, Socrates did not yield. He faced death with serenity, not because he wished to die, but because he refused to betray his principles. In that moment, he transformed philosophy from a theory into a way of being. Today, his voice returns, not from dusty scrolls, but from the quiet within us that asks, "Am I living according to truth?" For the art of living well, as Socrates saw it, is not a matter of luxury or intellect, but of integrity. It is the lifelong pursuit of harmony between thought and action, knowledge and humility, reason and soul. To listen to Socrates is to begin again, to question, to doubt, to awaken. And so, we step into his world, not to worship him, but to walk beside him. Every revolution in thought begins with a question. Before any empire falls, before any truth is reborn, there is always one person who dares to ask, why? Socrates was that person in Athens. In a city intoxicated by certainty, he walked barefoot through the dust of the Agora, speaking to merchants, generals, poets, and politicians. His questions were simple, yet devastating. What is justice? What is goodness? Do you truly know what you claim to know? To some, he was a hero. To others, a pest, the gadfly of Athens, as he called himself. He stung the city awake, refusing to let comfort dull its conscience. His courage was not in wielding power or force, but in wielding truth against illusion. This courage is what the modern soul lacks most. In an era of social performance, where opinions are currency and silence feels like weakness, few dare to stand against falsehood, especially when the crowd cheers for it. But Socrates teaches us that the courage to question is a foundation of freedom. To question is not rebellion, it is responsibility. It is a refusal to be enslaved by unexamined beliefs. His courage was not loud. It was calm, deliberate, and humble, born from conviction that truth is nothing to fear from scrutiny. In every person who asks difficult questions, in classrooms, parliaments, relationships, or within the silence of their own heart, Socrates lives again. For courage, in his view, was not the absence of fear, but the strength to seek truth despite it. He who is not a good servant will not be a good master, Socrates once said. He who cannot question himself will never truly know freedom. And so we begin, not by shouting our truths, but by whispering our doubts, for wisdom begins in the question, not the answer. And yet, to question everything leads to an even greater paradox, the realization that knowing nothing may be the beginning of knowing everything. It begins with a confession, one that shook Athens to its core. I know that I know nothing. Socrates' most famous declaration was not a boast of humility, it was a revelation of humanity. He saw that the greatest obstacle to truth is not ignorance itself, it is the illusion of knowledge. The politicians believed themselves wise because they held power. The poets believed themselves wise because they held words. The craftsmen believed themselves wise because they held skill. Yet Socrates, who claimed nothing, saw more clearly than them all. In a world addicted to certainty, his admission was heresy, but he understood something timeless. True wisdom is born in the space where ego surrenders to wonder. We live today surrounded by knowledge, data, facts, algorithms, yet we drift further from understanding. We know how to make things, but not how to value them. We speak endlessly, but seldom listen. We have access to every answer, but few remember how to ask the right questions. Socrates reminds us that wisdom is not accumulation, it is purification. It is the quiet art of unlearning arrogance, of peeling away false beliefs until what remains is honest and human. His ignorance was not empty, it was alive. It was an open hand reaching toward truth, rather than a closed fist clinging to pride. In this humility lies power, the kind that no one can take away. For when a person admits their ignorance, they become a seeker, not a slave to illusion. The only true wisdom, he said, is in knowing you know nothing. And in that paradox, he gave the world its first taste of intellectual freedom. But freedom always comes at a price, and for Socrates, that price was truth itself, placed on trial before those who could not bear its light. The day of the trial dawned without mercy. Socrates stood before the Athenian jury, not as a criminal, but as a mirror held up to their hypocrisy. The city that once celebrated free thought now condemned it. He was accused of corrupting the youth and dishonouring the gods. But what truly frightened his accusers was not corruption, it was exposure. His questions revealed too much. They stripped away pretense, leaving naked the pride of those who pretended to know justice yet practiced none. He could have fled. He could have begged for mercy. But he did neither. Instead, he stood firm and said, "If you offered to let me go on the condition that I should cease from teaching philosophy, I should answer you, men of Athens, I respect and love you, but I shall obey the god rather than you." In that single act, Socrates turned a trial into a testimony. He showed that truth cannot be negotiated, that justice is not what the majority declares, but what the conscience demands. As the verdict of death was read, the crowd murmured, but Socrates smiled. He knew that the soul cannot be imprisoned by walls or silenced by poison. And in that moment, the man condemned became immortal, for no court can kill integrity. Today, his trial is ours. Each time we choose comfort over truth, silence over honesty, or conformity over conscience, we repeat the same drama in our own hearts. To live the art of living well, Socrates would remind us, is to face judgment not from others, but from oneself, and to ensure the verdict is just. Transition. But judgment means nothing if the life itself is unexamined. And so, we come to the question that defined his legacy, and perhaps defines us still. You're watching Socratic Spark. If his philosophy sparks something in you, subscribe now and keep the flame of knowledge alive. There's a kind of blindness that wears the mask of sight, a life spent running, achieving, speaking, yet never truly seeing. Socrates called it the greatest tragedy of all, to live unexamined. In the quiet of his prison cell, before the cup of hemlock arrived, he spoke these words to his friends. The unexamined life is not worth living. Not because such a life is evil or unproductive, but because it is empty. To live without reflection is to wander through existence as a shadow, busy, reactive, and unawake. The Athenians feared this kind of self-knowledge. They built their pride on wealth, glory, and reputation. To question those values was to question the very meaning of their lives. And so, they silenced the questioner. Yet, Socrates' words were never about condemnation. They were an invitation, a call to awaken from the sleep of unawareness. He wanted humanity to pause, to turn inward, to ask, "What am I doing?" Why am I doing it? Does this reflect what I truly value? The examined life, to Socrates, was not a life of endless analysis, but of harmony between inner truth and outer action. It was a courage to confront contradictions, to live with intention, and to seek meaning beyond habit. Look around today. The tools have changed, but the blindness remains. We chase productivity instead of purpose. We scroll through opinions instead of forming our own. We call distraction connection and comfort happiness. But Socrates would walk among us still, asking the same quiet question: are you alive or merely awake? He would remind us that reflection is not retreat, it is resistance. To pause is to reclaim our humanity from the noise that consumes it. To think deeply is to live deliberately. The unexamined life may be easier, but the examined life, however difficult, is real. It demands honesty, humility, and the willingness to stand naked before one's own soul. And in that raw honesty, we discover not despair, but liberation. For when we begin to understand ourselves, we also begin to understand life itself. But self-examination alone is not enough. For Socrates, knowledge without virtue is like light without warmth. It illuminates, but does not guide. In the ancient Greek tongue, the word arete meant excellence, not in skill, but in character. Socrates believed that this excellence, this virtue, was a compass of the soul. He taught that every human being, deep within, knows what is good. Evil, he said, is not born of wickedness, but of ignorance, a confusion of what truly benefits the soul. No one, he insisted, knowingly does wrong. People are not out of malice, but out of blindness. This was his revolution. While Athens glorified power, beauty, and wealth, Socrates glorified integrity, the harmony between what we know and what we do. Virtue, for him, was not something taught in books or imposed by laws. It was a living awareness, cultivated through self-examination and guided by reason. He believed that to know the good is to do the good, and that a soul aligned with virtue cannot be corrupted by circumstance. When he stood before the jury, condemned by lies and fear, he could have saved himself with flattery. But virtue forbade him. He chose to die rather than betray the truth he lived for, proving that moral strength is the truest form of power. In a world obsessed with appearances, Socrates turned inward, reminding us that true success is not external achievement but internal harmony. The one who lives by virtue needs no applause, for their peace comes from within. Today, we search for direction in politics, influences, ideologies, but forget that the compass already lies in the soul. Virtue is not an ancient word. It is a timeless necessity. It is a quiet voice that says, do what is right, even if unseen. Speak the truth, even if unheard. We are what we repeatedly do, Aristotle would later write, echoing his teacher's wisdom. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. Virtue transforms habit into holiness, action into art. It makes of every life, no matter how humble, a masterpiece of character. But virtue, like wisdom, cannot survive in silence. It must breathe, in dialogue, in understanding, in the shared pursuit of truth. For the soul, left alone, forgets its own music. Socrates left behind no written word, only conversations. He believed truth was not a monologue, but a meeting, a spark born when two minds collide in honest pursuit of understanding. This was a Socratic dialogue, a living dance of thought and humility. He asked, others answered. He listened, then questioned again. Through dialogue, ignorance was revealed not as shame, but as a beginning of wisdom. In a world divided by noise and certainty, this legacy feels almost sacred. We debate to win, not to learn. We speak to be heard, not to understand. We have forgotten that conversation is not combat, but communion. Socrates would walk among us and ask, can two souls meet if both are shouting? He would remind us that to truly converse is to surrender pride, to risk being changed. It is a courage to let truth emerge between us rather than within only one of us. Plato carried this flame forward in his dialogues, each a window into how the mind of Socrates moved, never imposing, always unveiling. Through questioning, he showed that wisdom is not possessed, but pursued, and through listening, he proved that truth is not owned, but shared. Imagine a world where conversation replaced conflict, where the goal of speech was not victory, but understanding. That was Socrates' dream and his enduring gift to humanity. He believed dialogue could heal ignorance, bridge difference, and awaken conscience. Each question, each honest exchange, was a step toward a more conscious civilization. When the debate is lost, he warned, slander becomes a tool of the loser. And indeed, they slandered him until the hemlock silenced his voice. But silence cannot kill dialogue. For every generation since, his spirit has reappeared, in classrooms, in protests, in quiet talks between friends who dare to speak honestly. To live well, then, is not to live alone in one's mind, but to engage, to ask, to listen, to learn, to grow. The art of living well is, in truth, the art of communing with wisdom, within and beyond oneself. And as a final day approached, Socrates did not speak of revenge or regret. He spoke of the soul, of virtue, of truth, as if death were not an end, but the last question. The final test of philosophy is not in words, but in how one meets the end. For Socrates, death was not a tragedy, it was a revelation. In the cold stone chamber where his sentence awaited, friends gathered around him in disbelief. They wept, pleaded, begged him to escape. But he refused. "Would you have me live as a coward?" he asked quietly. "Better to die for what is just than to live for what is false." To him, courage was not defiance, it was understanding. He had spent his life teaching that the soul, not the body, is the true self. And if the soul lives by virtue, then death cannot harm it. The Athenian could poison his flesh, but not his conscience. And so he met death as he had lived, calmly, rationally, fearlessly. He reminded his disciples that to fear death is to pretend knowledge, to claim certainty about what we cannot know. For all we know, he said, death may be the greatest good. This was no denial of fear, it was mastery of it. Courage, for Socrates, was not the absence of fear but the triumph of reason over it. He had often said that philosophy was a preparation for death, not in morbid obsession, but in the realization that truth is eternal, and the soul's peace cannot depend on temporary things. So when he drank the hemlock, he did not resist. He raised the cup as one might lift a sacred chalice, a final act of faith in the power of reason and virtue. And as the poison reached his heart, he whispered to Crito, "We owe a cock to Asclepius. See that it is paid." A strange final line, yet profound. The cock was a traditional offering to the god of healing. By those words, Socrates meant, death itself is a cure. The soul, at last, is healed of ignorance and illusion. But what was this soul he spoke of? What was this inner essence that even death could not touch? To Socrates, the soul was not a metaphor. It was a very substance of being. It was what thought, felt, questioned, and chose. It was, in essence, the self that seeks truth. He argued that the soul pre-existed the body and would continue beyond it. Like a musician leaving one instrument for another, the soul sheds a body and continues its song. In Plato's Phaedo, Socrates explains, the soul is most like that which is divine, immortal, intelligible, indissoluble, always the same as itself. This vision transformed philosophy forever. If the soul is immortal, then every choice we make carries eternal weight. Virtue is not just good manners, it is nourishment for eternity. Evil is not just error, it is sickness of the soul. For Socrates, to live wisely was to prepare the soul for freedom. The more it turned toward truth, the lighter it became. The more it clung to lust, greed, and deceit, the heavier, chained to the material world it could never leave behind. In this view, philosophy becomes a sacred act, the purification of the soul. Each honest question scrubs away illusion. Each act of virtue polishes a mirror of the mind until it reflects truth clearly. No evil can happen to a good man, either in life or after death. These words, spoken in his defense, echo like a prayer. For the one who lives with integrity is never truly defeated, not even by death. Today, in a world afraid of silence and obsessed with survival, Socrates would ask, if you save your body but lose your soul, have you truly lived? He would urge us to care not only for what we own or achieve, but for who we become. Because when the last day comes, that is all we carry forward. But even the soul, eternal as it may be, cannot live in isolation. For Socrates, truth was not only about the self, it was about how we live together. When Socrates spoke of justice, he did not mean laws or punishments. He meant balance. Just as harmony in music depends on each note knowing its place, harmony in the soul depends on each part fulfilling its role. Reason must guide. Spirit must give courage. Desire must obey. When reason rules with wisdom, the soul becomes just. When desire overthrows it, chaos follows. He saw the same truth in society. A city, like a soul, thrives when wisdom leads, courage protects, and moderation sustains. But when greed rules or ignorance prevails, both city and soul fall sick. Justice, he said, is not in the laws of men, but in the order of the soul. The trial of Socrates was, therefore, the ultimate irony. Athens condemned the very man who sought to heal it. He was, as he called himself, a gadfly, stinging the sleeping horse of the city so it might awaken to its own corruption. But instead of awakening, it kicked him away. Still, his message endures. True justice begins within. You cannot have a just society without just individuals. And you cannot be just outwardly if you are at war with yourself inwardly. We live in an age of laws but little conscience, of rights but little reflection. Socrates would remind us that justice is not what we demand of others. It is what we cultivate within ourselves. A just life is one where thought, word, and deed align, where truth is not spoken merely, but lived. And when all else fails, when the city betrays you, when your body falters, when the world turns against truth, there remains one unshakable force. They silence his voice, but not his vision. They buried his body, but not his question. Socrates understood that truth is not a possession but a flame, passed from mind to mind, heart to heart, century to century. He was but its keeper for a time. When he died, Plato caught the flame, then Aristotle, then the Stoics, then the Renaissance, and onward to every thinker, dreamer, and rebel who dared to ask why. Truth is indestructible because it lives wherever someone questions a false. It is a quiet defiance of conscience against conformity, the whisper that survives even in prisons and courts. False words, he said, are not only evil in themselves, but they infect the soul with evil. That infection still spreads, through propaganda, comfort, and fear. Yet wherever one person dares to speak honestly, the antidote returns. Socrates would not ask us to believe. He would ask us to question. For faith without understanding is obedience, not wisdom. And obedience without truth is a beginning of tyranny. He did not die for religion or nation. He died for integrity. His blood was the ink of philosophy. His silence, the echo of truth that never dies. Today, the flame burns in classrooms, in art, in rebellion, in quiet midnight thoughts when we ask, am I living truthfully? And each time we choose honesty over comfort, courage over fear, authenticity over appearance, the Socratic flame flickers alive again. For truth, like fire, may burn, but it also purifies. And in that light, the art of living well reveals itself. To seek truth, to live with virtue, to face death with peace, and to let the flame pass on. Before Socrates, philosophy was a whisper in the wind, scattered among poets, priests, and mystics. Then he arrived, barefoot, poor, yet unstoppable, walking the dusty streets of Athens with a single weapon, a question. He did not lecture, he listened. He did not proclaim truth, he unearthed it. He turned philosophy from cosmic speculation to the intimate art of self-understanding. Before him, men asked, what is the universe made of? After him, they asked, what kind of person should I be? This shift changed everything. The entire structure of Western thought, ethics, politics, logic, science, was born from his questions. He taught Plato, Plato taught Aristotle, Aristotle taught Alexander, and through them, the world itself was reshaped. Empires rose and fell, but Socrates' idea endured, that reason and conscience are the true rulers of humanity. The Western mind, its curiosity, skepticism, and moral ambition, began with one man daring to ask, what is truth? But Socrates did not live for fame or legacy. His goal was something purer, to teach others how to think, not what to think. Socrates never founded a school. His classroom was a marketplace, his student whoever cared enough to listen. Yet from that humble circle of dialogues came the world's greatest lineage of thinkers. Plato called him the wisest and most just of all men. Aristotle, though more scientific, inherited his reverence for reason. Even the Stoics, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, carried his torch of inner discipline and virtue. Centuries later, Christian philosophers found in him the moral courage that mirrored their saints. Renaissance humanists called him the father of conscience. And Enlightenment thinkers, from Voltaire to Kant, drew from his defiance of ignorance and tyranny. He did not build temples, he built minds. He did not write scriptures, he lit a flame in the human intellect that still burns in every age that values truth. When Galileo looked through his telescope, when Newton sought the laws of motion, when Einstein pondered time, all were, knowingly or not, students of Socratic courage, the refusal to accept without questioning. To teach, in the Socratic sense, is not to fill a mind, but to awaken it, and that awakening, once begun, cannot die. But the spirit of Socrates was not confined to philosophy. It breathed life into science itself. What is science, if not the discipline of doubt? What is philosophy, if not the art of questioning certainty? Both are children of Socrates, born from his conviction that wisdom begins in ignorance. When he said, "I know that I know nothing," he was not surrendering. He was opening the door to discovery. It was a birth cry of intellectual humility, the foundation of all learning. This humility became the heartbeat of science. Every hypothesis is a question. Every experiment, a dialogue with nature. Every discovery, a temporary answer waiting to be challenged again. Socrates would have admired this process deeply, for it mirrors his own method. He dismantled false claims with logic, sought evidence through dialogue, and accepted truth only when reason demanded it. In the same way, the great modern minds, from Descartes to Darwin, carried forward his torch. Descartes began with doubt. Darwin challenged creation myths. Einstein questioned space and time themselves. The Socratic spirit is a refusal to let comfort outrun curiosity. It is a fire that keeps civilization thinking. And yet, amid our technological triumphs, something has been lost. Knowledge multiplies, but wisdom thins. We have learned to build machines that think, but not souls that reflect. Socrates would look at our world of algorithms and data and ask, "You have measured the stars, but have you measured your own heart?" The age of information has become an age of distraction, and the philosopher's voice must rise again. Imagine Socrates in today's world. He walks not through the agora, but through glowing screens and crowded feeds. He hears opinions shouted like weapons, truth traded for likes, and wisdom drowned in noise. Would he despair? No. He would do what he always did, ask a question. "You speak," he might say, "but do you understand what you say? You post, but do you know why?" The digital age has given humanity infinite voices, yet stolen its silence. We are connected to everyone but disconnected from ourselves. We seek validation instead of virtue, attention instead of truth. Socrates would not condemn technology. He would humanize it. He would remind us that knowledge without self-knowledge is dangerous, that power without virtue is corruption. He would tell us that wisdom cannot be downloaded. It must be lived. That truth cannot trend. It must be sought. That identity is not performance, but presence. Beware, he might warn, the man who knows everything except himself. In a world addicted to certainty, Socrates would reintroduce doubt, not as confusion, but as freedom. For doubt, when guided by reason, becomes a doorway to understanding. And so his voice calls out even now, not from books, but from the conscience of every soul that still dares to ask why. To live wisely, in the Socratic sense, is not to have all the answers. It is to love the search. Wisdom is not found in temples or theories, but in the quiet honesty of everyday choices. How we speak, how we listen, how we treat others, how we face the mirror of our own mind. Socrates taught that the examined life is not a path of comfort, but of freedom. Each question we ask peels away illusion. Each act of virtue brings a soul closer to harmony. And each moment of truth, no matter how painful, brings us nearer to peace. He does not ask us to worship him. He asks us to continue him, to be the gadfly in a world asleep, to awaken others with compassion, not arrogance, to build a civilization where truth matters more than convenience. Because the art of living well is not a philosophy, it is a practice. It is the daily discipline of aligning thought, word, and deed with what is true. So the question remains, not for Athens, but for us. Will we live examined lives, or will we let the noise consume us? If we choose the former, we honor not just Socrates, but the timeless possibility within every human soul. To think clearly, to act justly, to live freely, and in that moment, whether in ancient Athens or the digital age, the eternal questioner lives again. The sun sinks over Athens. The shadows lengthen on the worn stones where a barefoot man once stood, asking questions that still have not found their final answers. The marketplace is gone. The voices of his accusers are dust. Yet the echo of one question, what is a good life, still moves through every human heart. Socrates never claimed to know the truth. He claimed only the courage to seek it. He taught us that wisdom begins when the noise ends, when pride softens into humility, when we look within and ask, who am I, really? He showed that courage is not in the sword, but in the steadfastness of conscience. That virtue is not performance, but alignment, the quiet harmony between what we believe and how we live. That death itself loses its sting when the soul is anchored in truth. More than 2 millennia have passed, and still we stand at the same crossroads he faced. Between comfort and conviction, between imitation and authenticity, between ignorance and awakening. We have conquered the world, but not ourselves. We have filled our mind, but forgotten our souls. And in the dim glow of our endless screens, his voice returns, calm, piercing, unafraid. The unexamined life is not worth living. It is not a condemnation. It is a call to turn inward, to rediscover the sacred work of self-knowledge, to remember that truth is not hidden in temples or algorithms, but in the honest silence of our own hearts. He drank the hemlock, yes, but his death was not defeat. It was a reminder that ideas cannot be executed, that truth cannot be buried, that the examined soul is immortal because it lives in alignment with what is eternal. And so, the film closes where it began, not with answers, but with a question whispered through time, from the prison of Athens to the mind of every listener who still dares to wonder. Will you live merely to exist, or will you live to understand? The camera fades, the light narrows to a single ember, and in that final flicker, we see not Socrates' face, but our own, reflected in the mirror of his wisdom. The art of living well is not about perfection. It is about the courage to question, the honesty to see, and the grace to change. When we live that way, when thought and virtue walk together, then the voice of Socrates is no longer ancient. It is alive. It speaks through us. It is us. And so the question endures, not as a ghost from the past, but as a light for every age to come. This was just one spark of wisdom, but there's so much more ahead. Join the journey. Subscribe to Socratic Spark, and let philosophy guide your path to success.